A well-known African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The growth of an organization often depends on the strength of the working relationships within and between its teams. Stephen Covey Jr. has said, there's one thing that is common to every individual, relationship, team, family, organization, nation, economy, and civilization throughout the world. One thing which, if removed, will destroy the most powerful government, the most successful business, the most thriving economy, the most influential leadership, the greatest friendship, the strongest character, the deepest love. On the other hand, if developed and leveraged, that one thing has the potential to create unparalleled success and prosperity in every dimension of life. Yet it is the least understood, most neglected, and most underestimated possibility of our time. That one thing is trust. Patrick Lencioni, in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, argues that the absence of trust is often the foundational problem on dysfunctional teams. It can lead to other dysfunctions. When team members don't trust one another, they're much less likely to express themselves because they're afraid of conflict, the second dysfunction he mentions. The result is often inferior decisions. Lencioni goes on to say that the avoidance of conflict means that people are not really invested in the decision-making process, leading to the third dysfunction, an overall lack of commitment to the decisions and the subsequent implementation process. The fourth dysfunction, avoidance of accountability, is a natural progression from the previous 3. When there's not a strong commitment to a plan of action, team members are hesitant to hold one another accountable in executing the plan. Without this accountability, team members do not pay attention to results, the 5th dysfunction. Instead, they tend to look out for their own interests, sometimes at the expense of others' interests or the interests of the team. 5 dysfunctions that all start with an absence of trust. Where there is trust, there is healthy conflict that draws team members deeply into the discussion so that they are more likely to be committed to the decisions. Because of this co-ownership of the decisions, team members are much more willing to hold each other accountable and pay attention to results. Trust is the foundational element for building a strong team. Let's take a look at an example of how this might work in a church that wants to build greater trust between the church staff and the board. Here are some ideas to consider. The first one is to simply spend time together. There's no substitute for just hanging out together in a relaxed, fun environment. For example, in the churches where I've served, we've done board staff meals and retreats. When I was starting out in pastoral ministry, my lead pastor would remind the staff team to make the most of our overnight leadership retreats by spending time with non-staff leaders. It was prime time to build relationships. The primary relationship in the board staff team is between the lead pastor and the chair or moderator of the board. If you're one of those people, make sure that you meet with your counterpart once or twice a month, preferably for a relaxed discussion over coffee or a meal. Build a strong relationship, even as you discuss church matters. It's also important to encourage or even structure regular interactions between individual board members and staff. Relationships provide the context in which trust can flourish. The second way to build greater trust between church staff and board is to overcommunicate. Distrust can sometimes build because of a lack of information or misinformation. Employ mechanisms so that board members know what staff are doing and the challenges they face. Staff also need to hear about board discussions and the heart behind them. This is a key responsibility of the lead or executive pastor if not all of the staff are on the board. Seeing and knowing about the actions of others can often build credibility when those actions are perceived as honorable and supportive of the organizational mission. This knowledge also provides a context for understanding subsequent board and staff actions and even reactions from others in the church. Another idea for building trust is to focus on mission together. Board members and staff will have a stronger working relationship when they rally together around a shared mission. It's also important to avoid triangulation. People in the church will sometimes take a ministry concern to a board member instead of going directly to the staff person who oversees that ministry. This kind of triangulation is highly dysfunctional and breeds distrust. On one board I served, we actually had to add avoiding triangulation to our board code of conduct because it was such a problem. The fifth way to build trust is to avoid micromanagement. Board members often wear multiple hats. For example, it's natural for a board member who also serves as a small group leader to want to speak into the running of the small group ministry. Yet it's important that board members take a higher view of church matters, especially as a church grows in size. Another way to build trust between staff and the board is to deal with points of tension. The best time to deal with conflict is when it first starts. As interpersonal and philosophical tensions emerge between board and staff, and they will in a healthy, forward-moving church, it's important to name and discuss them. Conflict can actually help strengthen board-staff relations when dealt with in an open and loving way. The seventh way is to remember that individual board members are not the board. Sometimes well-intentioned board members will approach staff members about a concern they have about them or their ministry. It's imperative that board members, including the chair, make it clear that they speak for themselves unless the board has authorized them to speak on behalf of the board. It's easy for a staff person to get the impression that any board member speaks for the entire board. Number 8 is to conduct regular, strengths-based staff evaluations. In one of my Ministry Lift blogs, 5 Tips for Effective Staff Evaluations, I try to make a case for focusing on strengths when doing staff evaluations. Obviously, staff members may need to shore up weaker areas or recruit others to help in those areas. However, when people focus on using and developing their strengths, they tend to be much more effective and fulfilled. This is good for the staff member and the organization. And finally, adjust your governance model as your church grows. As a church grows in size, it's necessary to move beyond a management board to more of a strategic leadership board. If you don't, the church will likely stall in its growth. By the time a church hires a second pastor, if not sooner, it's important that board members start relinquishing ministry management to staff members. The board can then focus even more on providing visionary leadership, spiritual care, and developing policies that provide useful parameters for staff as they develop their ministries. Edward Marshall has said, "Speed happens when people truly trust each other." As team members trust each other more, the team will be able to increase their speed in accomplishing God's mission for them.